Meantime, here we do want to talk about this brewing case with our friend, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst, Neama Rahmani. He joins me. Neama, good to see you here. Hope you had a good weekend. You were talking a lot about this story today on social media. We'll get into some of your posts there to kind of flesh out some of the scenarios and how this will unfold. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that the operative word here from this story is intend. They haven't filed this suit yet, and so we'll have to be on the lookout for that. What are they alleging, Neama?
Well, they're alleging damages like any other case, but it's really going to be an uphill battle. Whenever you're filing any type of lawsuit, it can be a tort, it can be a civil rights claim. You have to prove liability and damages. And here, the government has broad immunity. Ironic because obviously Trump is enjoying that immunity, or at least seeking to do so in litigating some of these cases. But you can't really sue the government unless they allow you to do so, or there's some violation of a clearly established constitutional right. They have immunity. Imagine all the criminal defendants who could file lawsuits in cases where the case was dismissed. And importantly, in this particular case there in South Florida, it's not like it was dismissed because Trump was actually innocent. It was dismissed on procedural grounds. Some argue dubious procedural grounds because Jack Smith's appointment was unconstitutional. So I don't think this lawsuit is going to go anywhere, Andrew. This is more political theater during an election year than anything.
Okay, yeah, I was going to ask you next, is this directly correlated to Judge Eileen Cannon's decision to dismiss Jack Smith's classified documents case against former President Trump? She found that the appointment of Smith himself was unconstitutional here, and maybe you could make the argument, and maybe the Trump campaign had made that argument, that they were, using that as an opportunity to file this suit. We don't know that. We haven't heard from the Trump campaign on some of their motives for filing this, but Neama, if the FBI gets a warrant from a judge to search any property, let alone Mar-a-Lago, the residence of a former president and the current nominee for the Republican Party, the warrant stands. I mean, how can you, even though the case had been dismissed, that, predicated the entire case to begin with, allege these damages?
And cases get dismissed all the time, Andrew. Like you said, you can't go back and sue the FBI or law enforcement who's really doing their job, executing a lawfully issued warrant signed by a federal judge. And, people have asked me, well, the warrant allowed for deadly force. And my response is, well, almost every warrant allows for deadly force. And even if the warrant doesn't specifically say that agents can use deadly force, any law enforcement officer in this country, or any individual for that matter, can use deadly force to protect themselves or others if there's risk of death or serious bodily injury. So there was nothing improper about the warrant. Now, some people, of course, will argue that this was all politically motivated, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Hunter Biden. But generally speaking, unless the prosecution is for some constitutionally prohibited reason, race, religion, national origin, those arguments don't hold any legal water. That's why they failed every time they've been raised in any case, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. Both Trump and Hunter Biden have raised these same arguments and they've lost every time.
But Neama, putting the political considerations aside, if you're a would-be defendant and your business or your home gets raided and then the case gets dropped later on, do we see that pretty regularly, or is this rare that the would-be defendant or former defendant goes after the authority that went after them to begin with?
It does happen, and it happens if there's, for instance, prosecutorial misconduct.
Okay.
Prosecutors are withholding evidence, not turning over exculpatory evidence. We do see these types of lawsuits, but again, there's that clear constitutional violation. And here, the violation, if any, was related to Jack Smith's appointment, and we're not even certain if the 11th Circuit or the Supreme Court is going to affirm that decision. That calls into question the appointments of special counsels for decades in this country. So again, I don't think this is the type of case where the Trump team is going to get too far. I expect this case to be dismissed as well, if and when it's filed.
Yeah, and that was the point I was going to bring up. You made it just then that this case isn't necessarily completely over. It's working its way through the higher courts. It's at the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. Jack Smith appealed Judge Cannon's decision to still have the case in the classified documents probe here.
Absolutely. And it goes back to really the resolution of that classified documents case. It's not like a jury or even a judge found that Trump was actually innocent. He could have the documents, or, he didn't know that he was retaining them unlawfully. And it's not even the fact that Trump was immune and the case shouldn't have been filed in the first place. It's really a question of who was the one prosecuting the case. According to Judge Cannon, it should have been the U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Florida, because that individual was appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. It's really an appointments clause issue, or an appropriation of funds issue. It's not like it's an actual innocence issue, which makes the case even that much more difficult.
Okay, speaking of making the case difficult, though, Neama, I mean, how can Trump's lawyers prove that there was clear intent to engage in political persecution on the part of the DOJ? I mean, that seems near impossible. I mean, how do you prove that in a court?
It's very hard to prove. They would need to conduct discovery into the Department of Justice and to really peel back the layers of the onion and say, why was this case brought in the first place? So obviously, if the case does move forward in civil litigation, you'd have discovery. Folks would have their deposition taken. You'd be able to subpoena documents, emails, text messages, communications between Jack Smith and those that were part of the special counsel's team who decided to bring this case. That's how you would prove it if a judge does allow it to move forward.
Okay, and I know we're dealing with a lot of hypothetical scenarios here, but this story just broke today, and it warrants a lot of coverage because I think it's compelling and it's interesting here. I remember August 8th, 2022, that was the day of the FBI's raid on Mar-a-Lago. It was the biggest story that month, and you and I are still talking about it now, clearly. But say Trump gets elected in November, and of course, he, as the executive, would oversee the Department of Justice here. So if this case is filed in the interim and Trump wins, Trump would be filing suit and working through all of this while overseeing the DOJ as president, his own DOJ.
Yes, and the Department of Justice does many things, including prosecuting individuals. But a lot of folks don't know they actually defend the United States in lawsuits like this that are filed. So Trump and his Department of Justice would be in a very interesting position where they would have to be defending against this very lawsuit. So it'll be interesting to see if Trump actually decides to pursue it if he is elected. And we actually saw this with the Biden administration as well, where they were put in this awkward position where they were defending the government with respect to policies that Donald Trump had instituted, because organizations, liberal organizations like the ACLU, were suing over those types of policies.
Neama, before we let you go, one more kind of piece of news on Jack Smith and the cases that he is bringing against Donald Trump. I believe this was a couple of days ago. He's asking Judge Tanya Chutkan in D.C. for more time. Now, this is the federal election subversion case, also known as the January 6th case brought by Smith here. Why does he need more time?
I was surprised that he made that request as well. He wants more time to brief the presidential immunity issue now that the Supreme Court has ruled on it. Certainly not the clearest opinion that the justices have authored. Obviously, there was a concurrence by Justice Barrett, obviously a liberal dissent. But if I'm Jack Smith, I want to move this case forward as quickly as possible. I think he is worried that Judge Chutkan may actually entertain dismissal, not on the standing and the appointment grounds that Judge Cannon did, but to say that Donald Trump is at least all or partially immune from prosecution. So I think he wants to get it right.
All right. Neama Rahmani, as always, thanks for helping us make sense of these pretty big legal headlines. We'll talk again, Neama.
Of course. Thanks, Andrew.
All right. In the meantime here, let's take another quick commercial break. More where that came from in just 2 minutes.